All right, cool. So welcome to another episode of The Kingdom. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dip, the CTO of Soluna. And I'm really excited for this episode we're about to have. We have Kevin Kent on the phone, and we've been trying to get him on the podcast for a few months now. And it's just been hard to align schedules. But I'm really excited about this because as you guys may or may not know, my last startup was in energy efficiency for the home. And as I sunk my teeth into Soluna and what we were doing here, I realized that the data center space, is looking at energy efficiency in a new light. And this guy, Kevin, is like the man. And to get him on the line with us is really excited. Kevin, I'm really happy to have you, man, to talk about what you've learned. And you've been an expert in this space now for over 25 years. So you've seen a lot of shifts. And so, thanks again. It's really exciting to have you.
Yeah, so super excited to be here. I just want to make one comment where you said, I'm the man. I think I'm a little bit more humble than that. And what I can share with you is I've been really super fortunate to have many super fantastic mentors. I still stay in touch with many of them today and been really fortunate to learn from them and still learning. It's an ongoing process.
I love that. Mentorship was something that was driven into me very young. It's lucky, just like you, it's lucky to have that, it's like that quote, if I see farther, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's awesome that you bring that up because that's true. We take the ball and we go a little further.
Yeah.
And that ball's been carried a long way.
And every time I think I've mastered or understand something, and this within technology, if you don't keep moving forward, it changes so quickly, especially in data centers in the area of energy efficiencies and the mechanical and the electrical and even software that's available now. And it moves so quickly and it's hard to keep up with all of it, and having a good global community to connect with and learn from. So the things I tell you today, none of them are from me. These are things I've learned from the global data center community, still learning. And honestly, it's really a privilege and honor for me to be able, anytime I can share, to represent those people that have put so much work and effort into this. And it just means a great deal to me to be able to share and be here with you guys today.
And that's how we feel, right? When we find amazing experts like you that are connectors in the space and been in the space and learn from all in the space, that's how we get our foot in the door and start to learn the most, right? And, I'd actually like to, one of the questions that I think was very fascinating for me to learn as I sunk my teeth into is, we always talk about data centers, right? And people kind of have if you watch war games or Hackers or any of these movies that have an idea what they look like that aren't real at all, I'd love for you to just talk through a little bit about, what is a data center? What's the real purpose of it? And then some of the things that blew my mind was the selection criteria, like how you actually select where these massive buildings and huge infrastructures and basically new economies get to go. How does that selection process work? And I'd love for you to just dive in and give us some thoughts on that, man.
Yeah, so really just simplistically to explain what a data center is, it is any facility that is housing anywhere from a few to several thousand pieces of what we call information technology or IT technology equipment. That would be servers, switches, storage, any type of software that monitors that equipment, fire suppression, detection, and then you have a whole nother side of mechanicals or HVAC equipment or cooling, which is incredibly important in the facility. You also have your electrical side, which is comprised of power coming into the building, UPS system, automatic transfer switches, parallel gear, generators, everything to keep the facility up and running. But really one of the most important aspects of a data center and the reason to centralize and to house the equipment here, especially in this day and age, it's security. These are incredibly secure facilities from hyperscales down to enterprise data centers, and the requirements on how we keep those facilities secure. They continue to grow in the favor of security. As far as selection, it's really interesting. 20 years ago, I worked for a long-distance telecom provider, and they're still around today. And our criteria for our data center was, hey, we really close to our cubes so we can be right there and get to it. And 20 years ago, that was acceptable. What we see now, and this is almost music to my ears, when we talk about data center or hyperscale facility or a colo or an enterprise being built, we're now looking at, hey, is there an environmental area that we can build this where we can take advantage of what we would call free cooling or air side economizers, where we're not compressing air, we're greatly reducing our carbon footprint, and we're using the air from the outside. Pretty amazing. In Sweden, they're doing some incredible things with their data centers and environment, but they built data centers next to a health club facility, and they'll take their heat waste or the heat rejection, and they'll use that to heat swimming pools. They're now looking at heating schools and hospitals. And when we get to the point where we're saying, hey, we don't want any waste, and we're looking at not wasting heat and the amount of heat that comes from a facility, that's really amazing. There is a newer facility here in the U.S. in Portland, Oregon, server domes. I can't tell you a ton about them. I've researched them a little bit, but they use little to no cooling and use a geodesic design and use physics to keep the equipment at a reasonable level. But the other part of selecting, hey, where am I going to put my data center? Columbus has been a hub for hyperscale facilities. We have Facebook, Google, Amazon, and several years ago, an infrastructure was built in the northwest side of Columbus that is incredibly attractive for data centers to come here. So your infrastructure, your electrical infrastructure, your connectivity to the network and the availability and bandwidth becomes extremely important.
Got you. So these data centers, you're not just looking at whether the energy is efficient. You're looking at whether it's available and stable. And then you have to layer onto that the infrastructure of just cooling and the infrastructure of communication. And
correct.
We know these data centers have more and more communication bandwidth needs, and I'm starting to look at videos now being shared at 8K resolution.
Yes.
Right? And then you add VR on top of that, and it's just the bandwidth needs are going to go up even more. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as a result, it's really hard to have the energy efficiency. I imagine like the Knights of the Round Table, right? And it's like you have the cooling guy, the electrical, person, and you have all these people, and the energy efficiency person might not have the largest voice in that room, right? And,
correct.
So it becomes hard, even though these data centers, as you and I know, but the world may not, they're consuming the planet, right? Like they're going.
Yes.
They're growing, they're bigger. Can you speak to just a little bit about how big they're getting and how much energy that you see them consuming?
Yeah, so speaking of the Knights of the Round Table, this is a great segue. Professor Ian Bitterlin, he's from Great Britain. He's done some fantastic research on data center energy consumption as well as projections. Recently, I was in San Francisco at a conference, and George Rocket, he's the CEO of Data Center Dynamics, he had a phenomenal panel discussion specifically on this, how much energy are data centers really using. And here's the bottom line. We have a ballpark. We feel there's around 8 million data centers globally. We feel in the past year that it's been roughly around 420 terawatts of electricity consumed. And best guess that we have is approximately 65 to 70% of the data centers are using power generated traditionally or from burning of fossil fuels. The panel discussion that George Rocket had, he had the Berkeley National Research Laboratory, someone from Facebook, Google. There was a representative there who does a little bit of work with the UN. And the projections, when we say, hey, we believe there will be 50 billion new devices connected, we believe that the amount of electricity data centers consume is going to reach this amount. That's where we start to disagree. And this is what this panel came to. And I felt this to be very profound, was this. We don't do a great job as data centers reporting our power consumption. One, many data centers feel it's proprietary information. I don't know that I completely agree or understand that. The amount of power I use, I don't know that that's proprietary, but data centers take that approach. We don't always report accurately. If we're measuring our consumption in one day out of the month, we're running our diesel generators just to test our backup system and is everything working properly. We're not reporting that. If I'm running diesel generators at two 1.25 megawatt diesel generators for an hour, I'm producing a carbon footprint, and that needs to be reported. So while we may like to argue, or I'm right, no, this person's right, no, that group's right, to me, that's just noise and irrelevant. And what we're really trying to do is let's just separate all of that. Let's recognize that, as you say, the amount of data centers is just growing exponentially. We are getting better on how efficiently we consume power from the server manufacturers, switch and storage manufacturers, much more efficient. They don't require near the level of cooling. But let's just recognize that we might not know exactly what it is, but that's not the problem. The problem is we have to figure out how to use less. And you and I, we become part of the problem as well. I can't go anywhere. I need to know, what's the score of the Buckeyes game? Are the Indians winning? Are the Reds winning? What's my bank account? What's going on? Ashley will tell you. I've got to be on LinkedIn, social media. But I recently saw a comparison with Google. They're the largest search provider, and I don't have the exact numbers with me, but one Google search, if you took the amount of Google searches done in 1 month, one of the equivalents that just shocked me was you could power over 4,000 homes with the amount of energy consumed from one Google search throughout the month. Not just one person, but throughout the month. All the number of Google searches, that's the equivalent. So when we can look at it that way,
that's just waste when I see that.
Right. But we begin to understand when you hit the Google search on your phone or your computer, there is no latency in data center, or there is no downtime in data centers now. There used to be acceptable. The new downtime was defined in AFCOM's State of the Data Center report 2 years ago. The new downtime is latency. If there is latency, we're upset. This can't happen. This is too slow. It needs to be quicker. And so we begin to understand that these are the things that are leading us to this problem. This is why our data centers are growing. Autonomous vehicles, excellent example of why the size of data centers are growing. The amount of data that an autonomous vehicle creates in a day is in the zettabyte, one. And it's, we have to have the storage throughout and connectivity. That isn't estimated.
Crazy. Yeah. But of course, but the ballpark number. That's
correct. And again, in the data center, we like to argue it, and it's important. We need our numbers to be as accurate as possible, but we like to sometimes argue that's not right. Yes, that's right. And we end up with a lot of finger pointing, and the problem goes unresolved. We don't make progress towards a better solution, but we're getting there. No question.
Arguing over the color of the Band-Aid, not the
yes.
Like, guys, the problem is and that's, when I first got to school, I came to school to learn how to start a business. This is when I went to MBA school. And I got there, and this professor, his name's Ian Hunter, from Scotland, actually. And he was talking about, New Zealand. And he was talking about how the middle class is growing exponentially around the world. And when people go from lower class to middle class, their energy use exponentially grows. And that's terrifying. And the thing is, we can't ethically or even as humankind hold that progress back. And that's the same with data centers. It's not on us to hold in fact, we should grow it. These connections, for all the negatives we talk about social media, the internet as a whole is incredible as a thing, right?
Correct.
And it's connecting everything, and it's just insane. And so if you think about it, to hold it back is bad. And so what we have to do is enable that growth, right?
Yes.
And that's why when you started talking about how energy efficiency needs to be the key, it resonated with me and with this team so much, because it's not about holding back, right? It's being more responsible with, exactly like you're saying, reporting of data, measuring what's efficient, what isn't, and ultimately making these things as fine-tuned as you can, so you can have more of them.
Yes. One of the comments I like to make when I talk with people, whether it's individually or at conferences, this is the goal. Exactly what you said. We don't want to get rid of data centers or scale them back. We want our internet. We want our connectivity, but we don't want to harm the planet. And that is possible. And for whatever the reasons are, we, as in the United States, we're really behind what I see in Europe, what I see in other countries outside of here. I think I understand the reasons why we are behind. I believe we're starting to see them change. Governor Cuomo in New York, the energy bills that they signed to say, hey, I believe it's by 2050, there will be no greenhouse emissions in the state of New York.
So cool.
Yeah, never in
So
my
cool.
lifetime did I think I would see something like that. And when I look at, so New York is obviously a huge, vast state, and I think New York City gets the bulk of the attention. I've been all through and across New York on my motorcycle, been to New York City several times, but when I just look at the cities, starting with New York City and you move out to the smaller, it's a huge challenge to be able to get there.
So big.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I do a lot of work with Environmental Foundation, Citizens Climate Lobby, the Climate Reality Project, which is former Vice President Al Gore. I was in Minneapolis, I think sometime back in July. It was a phenomenal and intense 3 days. But those type of movements and those people involved with those groups, they worked so hard at the local level, and the local level moved up and so forth. And so on until we got to the governor, and they had the support and the backing to do that. And it's amazing, absolutely amazing to see that.
That's wild, because you're there and you're seeing it from its growth, right? All the dirty stuff that comes with it, and the arguments and the fights, and ultimately, we get to enjoy the output of those type of committees and efforts. But to see them happen and drive it, I know that it's grueling and it's hard, right?
Yes.
It takes a long time, And can you actually really quickly go through your background? I know we should have done this earlier, but I figure why not bring it up now anyway? Can we go through a little bit about, your background and, what it is you're doing now, spend your time doing? Because I noticed that you're a founder yourself. And so
yes, absolutely.
I'd love to dive into that. And then from there, I think it'll be a perfect way to talk about how you're seeing a shift in data center architecture, right?
Okay, yeah. So I actually studied music education with a minor in phys ed and science ed at Ohio State. So if I would have dropped the science ed and selected industrial arts, I would have picked the three areas that get eliminated from school systems in Ohio whenever there's financial problems. But as my family started to grow, the realization was you can't raise 6 kids on a teacher's salary. And I took the ability to teach and got a job as a corporate trainer at a local bank. Did a 3-week training class on banking regulations and computer systems. The computer systems part fascinated me. This was in the 90s, where computers as we know them today were significantly less and different. And I evolved into really falling in love with technology, started grabbing certifications in every area that I could, and slowly but surely found my way going into the data centers. And the data center space always fascinated me, from the whole raised floor, the amount of power coming into a facility, the mechanicals. And in my early days, I worked with some gentlemen that were mechanical engineers and electrical engineers, which I am not, and have always felt that that was a hindrance, and has made me work so much harder to feel like I could earn my keep in that space. But I had a great opportunity to learn from many folks who had deep understanding and were patient, and allowed me the opportunity to gain information from them and then apply it, almost using the data center at times as a test space, but in a safe manner. And I thought I had a lot of passion for that. And then as data centers go, the job starts to become mundane, and that's good. If you're excited in your data center job, that means you have yeah, and you do everything you can to make sure that that facility stays up and running. And if the facility isn't, it's a resume producing event, and nobody wants that. But my job became very mundane. I was very good at it. Our data center stayed up. We did everything by the book, and honestly, I became really bored, and the things I became excited about was just spending time with the family. As my kids got older, started to take motorcycle trips all over North America, and continue to do that. But during that time frame, I started to see significant changes in our own country. This past July, I literally rode Route 80 all the way from, I picked it up in Iowa, all the way to San Francisco. And I've done that route a few times. And to see the change, specifically through Wyoming, actually, I take that back, Nebraska and Iowa, I've never seen the Mississippi River up so high. And the flooding that was evident in Iowa and Nebraska, it was devastating. devastating. And it surprised me. We don't hear that much about it on our news. And we have farmers they'll be devastated financially, and we'll see the trickle effect come down. But through those trips, I really began to see drastic change in our environment. And then also the realization that hey, I'm working in an industry that at that point I didn't feel really cared a whole lot about what we were doing to the environment. And it was a big part of what was causing this problem. And in the early days of trying to give energy efficiency a voice, it was difficult. Met with a lot of fake news and scoffs and laughs. But one of my favorite sayings is, data doesn't lie. It absolutely never lies. And so I had to really dig into and rely on the data. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the report that they produced this past year, it was horrifying. But they talked about we measure CO2 emissions in a unit called parts per million, or ppm. In March, we hit an all-time high since man has been on this earth of 412 parts per million. The last time that we know CO2 levels could have been that high, sea levels were 90 feet higher. Mother Nature was a much more ravenous beast, and our planet was a wild place.
Equilibrium. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. And so the IPCC said, hey, listen, and they made this very wordy, if we don't drop 45% below our 2010 levels, our global temperatures will rise more than 2 degrees Celsius, and we're in deep trouble. And so what our data tells us now is we see global temperatures increasing, sea levels and the temperatures of sea levels rising. We have ice sheets melting 3 times quicker than anyone anticipated.
You can watch it.
You can watch it, absolutely. Yeah. And the data that's available now, believe it or not, I still go to conferences where people, they don't believe that, and it's okay. Even as we speak now, I never try to convince anyone that we have a climate emergency or we don't. All I try to do is to get them to open their minds, review the data, and then make a decision based off the data. But there's 2 ways we can look at this. One, we have a climate emergency, and there are things we can all do that are little, tiny changes that if we all do make a significant difference. Or the other approach I take is this. If you don't think we have a climate emergency, would you be in favor of drinking water that's not full of poisonous chemicals? Would you be interested in breathing air that is much cleaner and perhaps toxin free? Would you be willing to eat food that is not only good for you and your body, but good for the planet? And those are the 2 approaches I take, and it seems through those 2 you can connect with them. But I know the original question is, what are you doing? How do you get involved in this?
No,
and why?
it's good, because you're right. Like, you have to have a lasting impact, a reason to join this space.
Yes.
Right? To keep you doing what you're doing. So I think this is very important, what you're bringing up. So don't quit it.
Yeah. But there are so many people in the data center space with efficiencies that are doing great things. But part of the frustrations that I see in that is this: we're technology people, right? And our job is, we use this line of thinking that says we created this technology to provide internet connectivity and all these fantastic things that we offer globally. So we want to use that same level of thinking to fix this problem. And there are wonderful mechanical or HVAC equipment, and same thing with electricals, and those types of items continue to evolve, and they do become more efficient and better. But the area where I see data centers stop is this, that those are the things that will fix our problem. We don't always want to look at living with inside industry guidelines and standards such as ASHRAE, the guidelines that they provide for us.
Right? That's for heating and cooling, ASHRAE?
Yeah, absolutely. And they provide a wonderful guideline. They put our equipment in class A1, 2, 3, or 4. And even if you don't know what class you have, assume you have the lowest class equipment. They provide a recommended range of rack inlet temperatures, where they say shouldn't be anywhere below 68, nowhere above 84. But then they also say, hey, this is allowable. And that allowable range is huge. And the reason...
So they give guidelines like stretch, but
correct.
The allowable numbers are much, much easier to hit, kind of.
Yes, exactly. And in a data center, my number one job is this: it's reliability and health of the facility. And
Uptime.
Cooling, yes, absolutely. If there is a failure in equipment due to thermal inequities, thermal issues, that's a problem on me. That is what I get paid to make sure that that doesn't happen. So it is really easy to say, I'm just going to keep this data center ice cold, as cold as possible, and then I'm going to eliminate that risk. Uptime Institute produced some data this past year. The amount of waste in the US alone in cooling, they feel is around 50 billion kilowatt hours a year that we are wasting on overcooling. And this
billion kilowatt hours.
Correct. And the simplicity of fixing that problem, that comes at little to no capital cost. What it comes down to is this: you have to get your comfort level to understand there are industry standard guidelines. I will live, as far to the edge of those as I can without sacrificing the health and reliability of my facility. And in turn, I'm going to make a drastic reduction in the power I'm consuming through my mechanicals. And in turn, I'm reducing my carbon footprint and helping the problem.
I love it. So you're not even changing anything, just changing the thermostat.
Bingo. That's exactly right.
Like the computers won't die. Relax. Don't keep it. And if you could prove that, then all of a sudden you can make a measurable impact.
Yeah. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier where, hey, it comes down to we need to measure, report, and know where we are. A large percentage of enterprise data centers that I go into, they don't know where they are. They have no idea what their rack inlet temperatures are. And data center staffs, at least here in the US, they have dwindled over the years, less and less and less and less. I'll go into an enterprise data center that's 6,000 square feet, and they have 2 people to manage everything in there. So efficiency and trying to, as you say, adjust my thermostat.
They don't have time.
That's correct. Absolutely. And as you say, the Knights of the Round Table, efficiency, you want them to have a voice. Most places, there's not the opportunity to even sit at the table.
Wow. And so that's what your new mission is, huh? It looks like you left a great job. And now your mission is to be that knight, to go in, make your voice bigger.
So while I left that job, I actually came back very quickly. Ohio State was wonderful about allowing me to go back and work there as a contractor. They have been so supportive of all of my international travel, allowing me time to spread the word and be a global ambassador, not only for data centers, but Ohio State. And it's a wonderful place, and very grateful for the opportunities over the years that they've afforded me, especially this one.
That's so cool. And so tell me about your new company. What do you do and how do you spread the word? Because it's a lot of, there's a lot of people like me that you say I look like a Doc from Back to the Future. No one listens to me. And there's people like you who go to and speak to, So how do you not sound like a madman? The urgency there, obviously, right?
I think one of the things that really helps, and I didn't intend or think of it this way, I've spent all of my career on the end user side of the table and never been a vendor. And I've dealt with so many vendors and contractors. There are things I learned that I liked and didn't like, processes I didn't agree with. And when I approach folks or go into the data centers, I let them know that, and that I'm there to try and help them improve these things. And we have a pricing model that is really fair. The pricing model is I ask for a percentage of the savings that they gain. If they gain no savings, then they don't pay me anything. And I think folks are very willing to do that. But as far as spreading the word, there are a couple of groups here in the United States and then globally. AFCOM is a wonderful organization where folks like myself that are data center operators, we gather in local chapters. There's a great chapter in New York, New Jersey, the whole East Coast. And then once a year, we all gather for a global conference. But I do a lot of work through those organizations. I'm actually a member of the Data Center Institute Board of Directors, and myself and gurus, like we talk about energy efficiency geniuses, Mark Monroe. He's been an independent consultant for years. Microsoft has recently contracted with them to help develop the next level of energy efficient data center. Yeah. Cool. So I get to, share with guys like those, but it is all about awareness right now. Not only of the issues that we're having with our climate change, but the the changes that can be made in the data center with little to no capital expenses, but absolutely huge returns. And Ohio State has been a wonderful place for me to test these principles.
It's an amazing test bed. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually go to these AFCOM conferences, just hearing amazing presenters and talking about airflow management and all the savings. And I honestly started out in my data center because I thought it was all a bunch of garbage. And I was going to do all these tests and go back the following year and prove them wrong. And everything I did, I found out more and more that they were correct. But incidentally, in Ohio State over the last 4 years, we've invested $20,000 into the medical center's data center, and the cumulative savings is now nearing over $4 million. So when you look,
that's like the movie Clerks.
yeah,
20
right.
millions out. I love it.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm super excited about is talking with a lot of local providers here in the central Ohio area. I'm really working hard to get a microgrid for the medical center's data center. I want to decarbonize what they have, and I feel that the model we can create there through the use of solar and wind and natural gas generators and keeping our connectivity to our traditional grid, I feel we have a great chance at decarbonizing,
cool.
And then using that as a blueprint for other enterprise data centers to follow.
I love it. So like you're doing a dual pronged approach, right? You're going into actual data centers and proving that your techniques work, with Ohio State having your back as a test bed. And then you're going in from the top through these amazing councils and coalitions to kind of spread the word on energy efficiency awareness. So then now everybody kind of starts to gain it, right, from both directions. I love it because prove it, like you said, data doesn't lie, right? So if you go into a data center, you come out 2 weeks later with 20K in, and you could prove that you're on a slope to save millions of dollars, and you'd be an idiot not to do it, right? It pays for it. So I love it, man. And so let me ask you, look, real quick, my background afforded me as an engineer the ability to optimize everything. And for an engineer, that's like the promised land, right? And that's what kept me at Lockheed, because companies like Lockheed Martin, they don't pay you the most. I make double or triple, quadruple if I went to Google or, some other private sector. But being in the defense industry, you got to work on everything and turn it to 11, right? So when I left and I started looking at homes, that's how I started Ecovent. And then when I started looking at data centers, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, there's so many AC to DC conversions. Just like one very quick thing. I was like, look, all these computers run on 12 volts. And you're bringing in, whatever it is into the data center. It's like, why you have 15 conversions from AC to AC to AC to AC, AC to DC, right? And then they're like, no, now we're going DC to DC. And so I think that my ignorance in the space allowed me to come in and be like, well, in my previous work, when I built these radar systems, they were perfectly optimized, right? And so we would never allow a multiple power conversion if you could get away with it. But in data center space, that's not something that you optimize for. You want to buy cots, commercial off the shelf, power supplies. You want to buy cots. This, I don't want to do that. And so, to me, I would love to hear from you, because as I've gone to the conferences and started working with data center experts, I've got this awesome guy, Alan, who helps me out. And these few of you guys are starting to talk about DC to DC data centers, right? Full DC architecture inside. And I'm just wondering, if we fast forward even further, right? 10 to 15 years from now, how do you see the data center of the future, right? You're doing a microgrid at Ohio State, right? What other things do you kind of see happening in the data center space that maybe other people aren't thinking about yet? Like the next generation, maybe even the generation after that.
Yeah, I love what you were saying about all the conversions. When our data center that we're in now, it's around 15 years old. And I think everybody knows the biggest inefficiency in data centers and your greatest loss are through your electricals, your UPS, your automatic transfer switches. We were so proud that we had a UPS system that was a true online double conversion. We were ecstatic about that, where the power comes in as AC, it gets converted to DC, charges the batteries, goes back out as AC, and our power factor was, I don't know, say maybe 94%. And when you look at the
Which
amount
is pretty good. I mean, honestly.
well, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's how we felt. But when you start to look at that, the amount of power we have coming in and that loss, and you start equating that by day, by week, by month, by year, by
6% off the
5.
top. Yeah.
Right. So my understanding, and I haven't seen this in person, but Facebook has open compute. My understanding is they're doing a lot of DC to DC. They're skipping the UPS system. I can't tell you exactly how they're providing UPS power to their racks, but I know that's one of the places through their open compute that I've seen that. As far as how do I see data centers in the future that folks aren't already working on? So that's a trick question. And as data center people, there are, and I'm not one of them, but there are these brilliant minds that can forecast and see so far out. And I don't know that there isn't anything that is out there that we're not thinking of. But as far as the future of data centers, some things that are kind of on the edge, microgrid kind of comes and goes. I hear people get excited about it, and then it falls off, and then it kind of comes back. But renewable energies is definitely one of them. One of the problems we see with renewables is the transmission or the connectivity of, I've got these wind farms up in Toledo. How do I get that down to my data center? Right. And then the other part of that, and this is an area that is really coming on quickly. Jack Pouchette, he's one of the folks that I consider a mentor and a very good friend. He was with Verda for years. He left and went to Natron. They are working on a Prussian blue sodium ion battery for energy storage. And it's cool. Working really well, so we can generate this energy, and we can actually now store it. And that's an area of energy storage that I think we're going to see continue to grow. But how we cool data centers, liquid state cooling, full submersion cooling, newer company in Arizona called Force Physics. I don't understand or can't even really tell you exactly how this works. They're putting data centers with their technology in there where there's no mechanical cooling, and the equipment is just flourishing. And also where and how we build data centers, I think is going to change drastically, and already is changing. And but your point about the power, that's always going to be an area where we're going to see our most loss. And I think that's going to change. And the design's already changing. The application is getting a lot more practical. And,
I love it.
Yep. And the other thing is AI. A good friend of mine, Dave Sterlace, he works with ABB. He's done amazing work with Google. He tells this story about AI where they go into Google's data center, which is already incredibly efficient. They put their AI application in on their mechanicals. They turn it on and they see a 40% gain in efficiency, and they're like, oh, that can't be right. They turn it off and they see it reverse. They turn it on and there That's it is. So it comes back in. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So AI is getting more practical. The cost of it is dropping, and I believe AI will play a huge role in data centers and efficiency and the design of them.
Yeah, if you have
absolutely
data, right? Like,
correct.
Imagine a doctor without an X-ray, like,
oh yeah,
or without a blood test. It's like, okay, so build the X-ray, And so listen, I want to pick your brain a second, right? Because when I came into this space, one of the things that rocked my world was how much energy and waste goes into the concept of what I'm calling asynchronous computing tasks, right? So tasks that don't need fast latency and that don't need instantaneous bandwidth, but rather instead require tremendous amounts of compute. And I'll tell you why, right? Again, we'll go back to my radar days. It used to take me back then with Lockheed's power and skills, it would take years to develop a new chip, right? And millions of dollars. And now, you could spin a new chip in 6 months for $500K. It's a simple chip, but you could do it. And what I'm seeing in the venture capital space is lots of money going into hardware companies that are developing new chips, right?
Yes.
And so I start thinking, okay, Samsung is putting hundreds of billions of dollars into their chip technology. IBM, Google, Facebook, all these companies have to be hiring IC developers, integrated circuit, RFIC, these developers to build these chips. And my question is, could there be a seismic shift? Okay, not a shift, but another kind of data center that's coming up, one that can act as a battery in the sense that it consumes energy right away on demand, right? And it's optimized to basically create a home for these chips that don't necessarily need the overhead of a massive hyperscaler data center. This crazy cooling, it's crazy amounts of perfect energy and perfect uptime. Have you heard inkling? First of all, do you know what I'm saying, and do you agree or disagree? And then, depending on how you feel, what have you heard much in the industry about that kind of use? Because that's our model, right? Soluna's model is we have abundant green energy that's variable. Instead of spending all the money to bring it stable, let's just use the computers to stabilize it for the grid.
Yeah.
And as such, make green energy way more profitable, right?
Absolutely. So yeah, do I understand what you're saying? Not even close to the depth that you do, but in theory, absolutely. And do I agree with that? Absolutely. As far as data centers,
I didn't pay you to say that, by the way.
No, you did not. As far as data centers, that's not conversations that I've been part of. That doesn't mean that it's not happening. I've just not been privy to them. But I would agree with you. That seems like the natural evolution to where data centers are heading. And you mentioned about Samsung and the chip processors, and those are the roots of that dictate how we build and how we run data centers, and those are changing. And they're changing for the better, and that really helps us. It makes the facility easier to manage. And as you said, if we can have more data and we can understand it better, we can manage it better.
It's crazy. I was on Reddit this week, and we'll try and splice the video of this thing on here, but there was this model that they put on that modeled 50 years of the ocean when they inputted 1 million pieces of garbage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they're simulating the Pacific Great Garbage Patch, right? And they talked about in this model that the resolution that they used was 10 kilometer square blocks. And they're like, that's actually high for these type of things, right? And then they're like, it took them, I forget what it said, something like years, 10,000 computers for like 6 months or something like that. I'll put the number in the thing when I actually have it. I'm 90% I'm wrong, but it was something insane just to model that, because everyone on Reddit's like, why didn't you go up to 2018, dude? They're like, guys, take a look at it, right? They didn't understand the amount of data. And if I think about it, it's like, you brought this up earlier with self-driving cars bringing, which is a zettabyte of data per day. I don't even know how to say zettabyte.
Yeah. That's zettabyte. Yeah.
Zettabyte. And so, I was thinking, if you think about, okay, climate data, what if we wanted to evaluate on a millimeter basis instead of a kilometer, right? Or now, video, like all of the YouTube video that exists,
right.
4K can now be run through asynchronous computing. And now you can identify and pull out so much on what's going on in these videos. And it's a whole new world, because the amount of data that the world has collected over the last 10 years is insane, but no one has actually put that data to use yet. Right? They're still trying to figure out what to do. It's other than Google and Amazon and Facebook, the rest of the world is still trying to figure out, okay, I've collected tape drives and buildings full of data. Now what?
Right.
And to me, if that continues to grow, like you said, it should, and you're seeing it at the beginning, right, with the chips, it should, in my opinion, start to hopefully drive a new way to fund green energy, and that's, to me, if we can do that, because like you said earlier, the biggest problem with green energy is interfacing with a grid which has 100% uptime requirements and extremely variable demand. And, you really can't stabilize that demand other than with batteries and oil.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Stabilize the thing, you stabilize green energy with oil. And so if we can stabilize it with computers instead, we might be going. And it scares me that that you haven't heard many people talking about it, but the fact that you kind of see it happening and you don't think it's nuts, that encourages us.
So we'll talk about smart cities, smart data centers. And I love to talk about the grid. I'm not an expert on it. I know that our national grid is very old. It's served us extremely well. In my lifetime, I don't ever remember suffering electrical outages due to the grid, storms, et cetera. We get connectivity back right away. But when we talk about smart cities, smart data centers, and to your point, as far as computer process, don't burn oil, use the computer. We want to see our grid and the connectivity we have with data centers. We want to be able to use megabytes to move megawatts of power.
I love it. Yes.
Yes. Right. And so I liken this to thermostats in a home, right? When I'm growing up, we have mercury-based thermostats. You set it, it tips on, tips off. As I get older, we can program them. What did we find out? We found out that people would say, hey, I'm not home these 8 hours. I don't need my home to be, 72 degrees. I'm going to program it to go down to 64 and half hour before I come home back to 72. And we see us gain efficiency. And now I carry my smartphone around in my Nest, and we see the same possibilities in cities and in data centers. When we can have that reporting, that control, that exposure, that we understand, people will get very granular and really tighten stuff down and start to understand that I can realize savings by monitoring and measuring and adjusting accordingly. And that's so simple. There is no huge technology. There is no massive capital expenditure. It's understanding where you are and then manipulating and living within that environment that is still safe.
I love it. And how's the startup going? Your new consultancy that goes in and like SEAL team gets kills waste.
I learn something new every day, and it's really exciting. But I've had a lot of partnerships. AFCOM, I do a lot of work through. I also have to mention Data Center Dynamics. They're here in the U.S. and also globally. This was crazy. About 2 years ago, I was had a white paper published. Was part of an AFCOM Leaders Lab, and somebody sees this on LinkedIn. And I get an email and it says, hi, my name is Manaira Araujo. I work for this company. I would like to have you come be a keynote speaker in Brazil. And I'm like, what? The spam emails are getting real these days. And I almost deleted it. And, I decided, well, I'm going to respond back and see what happens. And then it was, well, I'd like to have a phone call with you. So I was just at the conception of trying to put a business together where I could do this. And this person really opened a lot of doors. I ended up going to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and that led to the opportunity to go to Sydney, Australia. And from there, Santiago de Chile.
So you see multiple different kinds of architectures.
Yeah. Madrid, Spain.
Wow.
Coming up in 2 weeks, I'm going to Singapore, Costa Rica, Mexico City, London, and I'm going to find out today I might be going to Cape Town in mid-November, and I would be coming from London. And if that's the case, I have to stop in Morocco and see this amazing wind farm that you have. But as far as my
it's not up yet. You just see land right now.
That's fine. I'd love to see that. Right. But as far as my company, that really opened a lot of doors, and one opportunity has led to another. I'm doing some training through these companies, doing some auditing. When I was in Madrid, Spain, I did my presentation. I talk about 10 minutes about climate change, and then here's how data centers positively and negatively are affecting. And their conferences are very efficient. I'm in the main auditorium, and I know I have to get out because somebody else is coming in. This older gentleman, older than me, he stops me halfway up, and he's like, Professor Kent. I'm like, okay, first of all, I'm not a professor. You just call me. He's like, okay, Professor Kent. And I'm like, all right, just call me Professor. He said, when you talk about climate change, you're speaking my company's language. He said, I'd love to have you come in and tour our data center and talk with my staff. And I said, hey, that's great. Can we go outside in the hallway and talk a little more? And do you have a card? And he's taller than I am, and he's standing in an area where I'm not going to get around him. And he hands me his card, and I look down at it, and my eyeballs are popping out of my head. And I look up at him, and he's just shaking his head. And he puts his hand on my shoulder. He goes, Professor Kent, it's okay. Let's go outside. He was CIO of the United Nations.
Holy crap. Wow.
And I'm like,
recognize that person, right?
I'm trying to get him out of the auditorium. I look down, I'm like, oh my goodness. So
my company's language. I love it.
And the Conference of the Parties, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, United Nations has a big part in that. So it seems like one opportunity continues to lead to another. And my work with Ohio State, it was 40 hours and they're giving me time to travel. And so I'm not spending vacation time, but now I'm to the point where I'm investing about 80% of my time in there for the next year. And I'm incredibly busy and very fortunate and blessed.
So how old are your kids?
My oldest will be 30 in May, and my youngest will be 22 in November.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, 6 kids in an 8-year span. That's amazing.
And I was 12 when my first one was born. I'm just
Wow.
kidding. No, I'm kidding. I was not. I was 24.
I love it. I was like, all right. Well,
okay. Yeah. Good for you.
No, man. I'm not going to judge. That's amazing. So I was going to say you could have interns, but they're beyond that age now.
Well, no, that's so this is, if we have time, this is a really interesting story. So being in the data center and IT space, I need to know the why. I have to be able to connect the dots or I just come to a standstill. And I was having a hard time understanding, like, how am I getting all these international and national speaking engagements, and why? I don't understand why this is going on. Well, my middle son, he's going to be a senior in college, phenomenal athlete. Football was definitely his game. I don't know if you know the name Urban Meyer. He was the head coach at Ohio State. His son went to high school with my kids.
Wow.
One of my son, Moose is his name. One of his specialties, linebacker, tight end, but he was a long snapper. And Urban Meyer's son was the holder. So Moose had plenty of exposure. And he had interest for people for him to play in college. Well, Moose has this very rare degenerative eye disease. And in the U.S., it's an orphan disease, which means FDA said, hey, we're not going to make any money on this. We're going to lose money, so we're not messing with it. UK and Canada, they're doing
orphan disease, huh?
Orphan disease.
Wow.
In UK and Canada, they're doing stem cell gene therapy. Long story short, Moose contacts me this spring. He said, Dad, there is a conference at Moorfield Eye Hospital in London, and if I'm there, there's a chance maybe I can get into either the gene therapy or stem cell therapy, which is 100% successful. And I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to get this kid to London? That's really expensive. 3 days later, Data Center Dynamics has a conference in London 3 days before, 1.2 miles apart from Moorfield Eye Hospital.
Wow.
So at that point, I'm like, I'm retiring. I'm going full go in my business, and we're going to make this happen. And that was a really cool experience.
That is an incredible story, man.
Yeah.
That's an awesome story. Wow. I love it. This is why we need folks like you, because you're not going to quit. You're not going to quit on this, like if that's, you said earlier, microgrids come and go. I feel like energy efficiency has like become sexy and then not sexy. Right. Now it's back sexy. I don't think it's going away this time. At least I hope it doesn't, because very real impacts are going to be felt by people, biodiversity, like at the age where we have more sensing equipment than ever, we have less species than ever. It's like, come on.
Correct.
This doesn't make any sense. The world is literally burning, and we're having debates that we shouldn't be having.
Exactly. Finger pointing. It's not, it is. Just look around, research the data.
Look at the data. Exactly. Like, you think I want to be talking about this stuff? Like, I'd rather we were fine. I was in Africa. Like, I grew up in animals, and to see it to disappear, it breaks my heart, because animals are so cool.
Yes,
we don't know anything about them. We don't know anything about them yet.
No, and you mentioned the world's on fire. The fires in the Amazon and the deforestation that's been happening there. It's heartbreaking and gut wrenching. But admittedly, there are plant and animal species in that region that we don't know anything about, and we may now never know.
Yeah, I saw this other thing on Reddit, of course, the other day, that talked about how like the shell from this one snail is proving like extremely effective at cancer treatment. And it's like, whoa, how would we, how did that, how would you ever even like find that, And it's pretty cool to see how like this is basically a waste product of a snail, can be ground up and used as medicine that we can't yet replicate in the lab or don't even know how to make.
Yeah.
There's this cool professor at MIT. He's working on like the building blocks of nature. So like they took a silkworm and they figured out which proteins create the silk. Yeah. And now they're making a spray for fruits and veggies.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, you've heard of this, right? It's like
Correct.
so cool, right? Like a micron thick layer can keep fruits better longer, and it's anti-allergenic, and it's completely sustainable, and it's literally nature, they just figured it out, but the actual building blocks came from nature, which I think is so wild.
Yeah.
Don't mess with evolution.
Oh, no. So you said something that sparked my memory. I've been involved around medicine or hospitals my whole life. My father was director of pharmacy at a local hospital. I've supported one of the largest and most successful academic medical centers in the country. And this is a lesson I've learned in all of the years being around medicine. We are very good at treating symptoms. We can take people that have terminal disease, and we can not only extend their life, but we can give them quality of life. But we absolutely cannot cure an illness or eradicate a disease until we understand the root cause. And when we look at our climate change or climate emergency, this debate is still going on. But the IPCC says it's basically 99% chance that our climate emergency is man-made, that we are the root cause. And that is a bitter pill for me to swallow.
It is. The
bitter
matrix,
pill.
right, man. We're a virus.
And so we know the root cause, but we're like, most people are, well, it won't affect me in my lifetime, which it is. It is affecting all of us now, or I don't care about that. And I'll be honest with you, in the 90s, when Al Gore was talking about the hole in the ozone and climate change, I'm like, I want a president who is for climate change, because I hate the winters in Ohio. I'll go to Alaska in the summer, and I'll come back to Ohio in the winter. It'll be great. And
Wow.
When I did the climate reality leadership training, I didn't have a chance to talk to Mr. Gore personally, but if I did, the first thing I would have said is, I'm really sorry, because I made fun of you and laughed at you ad nauseum.
I'll be honest, it was like, it's hard to care when you don't feel it. It's
Right.
like you drink a milkshake, you're not fatter that day, really, but you do it for a month. Now you see the impact, right? And
wait till you hit 45, because you'll drink the milkshake and you will feel it that day. And you'll feel it the entire day.
I love it. Hey, man, listen, like, this was awesome, and I'd love to keep chatting with you and check in again and see how it's going and what you're seeing, and keep you obviously in the loop and as close to what we're doing as possible. Because I think the Venn diagram between our mission and yours is very, very much looks like a circle, right? And so I think that it'd be great to keep you in the loop and catch you back on the Kingdom at some point, or just hang out one day and chat,
Yeah, I would love to do both of those. And I follow Saluna and all the progress they're making, and how you guys are approaching and what you're doing to me is absolutely amazing, and very much the reason why I wanted to be on this podcast. And Ashley and I stay in touch, and let's definitely stay in touch. And I'm eventually going to be in your area, and we'll grab dinner or something. But
absolutely,
I love talking with you. I feel like I could sit. I actually feel like I've known you forever. I feel like I could sit and talk for days with you.
Same here, man. I'm looking forward to more. I'm looking forward to more. All right, thank you again, man. It's really nice to meet you again, and looking forward to chatting a lot more. Be well.
All right. Appreciate it. Take care.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.